It's no secret how dry it is across western New York. In the left hand is a normal-sized peach, and in the right, peaches grown in a Niagara County orchard without irrigation.
We've never had a drought like this one, according to my father, who's 86.
We didn't know if we had enough water, that we started to cut out crops.
For 30 years, they've been telling us that the weather is going to get more severe and more unpredictable, and here we are.
With the climate change, the influxes of storms and hot weather and too much rain and that type of thing are going to only get worse. So.
Yeah, you guys still there at the farm, Margaret? I'm a first-generation farmer, so my parents worry about how we're doing here. They come from a younger, different generation that didn't borrow money. You know, a farm like this is heavily leveraged. We borrow a lot of money to make a farm work today. So they worry a lot about that. The drought itself, our income was down $250,000, about $250,000, because of smaller fruit size, lower yields. Also, we had a young orchard that took a real hit that didn't grow very well because of that. And those young orchards, when they go through a drought like that, never really recover. That's going to haunt me for a long time. So we live and die on size, and cherries need water to get size. So when you don't get much rain, or they overset, you get the smaller sized fruit. But then put the drought on top of it, and it was a disaster. So we left all those cherries on the trees. We can't risk a dry year or a bad year. It's just so much invested out there. We're spending $20,000 to plant an acre of orchards of apples. You just can't risk it.
Farmers are at the forefront to be able to start thinking about climate change. So my research focuses around thinking about how farmers are going to adapt to climate change, how we can help them adapt, but also in a very meaningful, reasonable, environmentally friendly way.
We got two things to handle with weather extremes. Got to have drainage to take away excess water, and then irrigation to put it on when you need it.
During the drought, I believe I put on average about 6 inches of water in the season, which that's probably about double of what I usually do. I believe it was like 35 to 40 grand in water bill. So the chip sensor, they can sense what the tree is doing with water control. Then the data from that, you could tell if the tree is getting enough water, or is it stressed about with the volume of water, and from there we can extrapolate, should we irrigate or not. The reason why we don't have them yet is they're still playing around with what to do with them, how to use them. I don't know if they have production yet enough for us to get them. So the last I knew, it's just a researcher, academia type technology, but there's a lot of potential with it.
We are so late this year because we just have had no warm weather. It's almost May 1, and we're just barely in bud. We should be seeing white bud by now. We should be seeing the flowers. So this tree's still half asleep. It hasn't even woken up from the winter, and they got a long ways to go. It's going to take a lot of heat yet to move these trees along.
Let's go this way. Every year's different. My dad always had a saying, about the time you think you got it figured out, you better brace your ass because something's going to happen. If you look at that picture up top, that's it's me planting some potatoes. I grew my first crop of potatoes that was mine in 1975. 85, 95, 05, 15. So this year will be my 43rd crop. Yeah, it's not going to work. Stuff's set for too long. Well, all the trucks are named just because it gives them a personality and it's fun to do. The first one over there and the third one are Vern and Vance, the Volvo brothers. So that their names have to start with a V. Somewhere there's a few others. Wendy is a white, so that has to start with a W. This International is actually an S-Series cab, so that one, you can't see it, but we named it Spike. And somewhere is Steve. 2 years ago, we didn't have a decent rain from the time we planted them until we harvested them. We've got $700,000 that we had to borrow to make up for what we couldn't pay back the last 2 years. we still owe that money. We still have to make enough money and pay that off. Plus, we still have to upgrade equipment when we need it. But that's part of the reason we went into gravel, we went into lime spreading. Yeah, it's more hours we have to work, but it's also more money coming in that we can help pay that debt back. As I always say, just try to keep the ball rolling, keep things moving.
It's starting to rain. When you have either weather or financial stresses, it takes quite a toll. I'm willing to change to make things more efficient, and I'm willing to try things, at least on a small scale, and see if it works.
So there's a lot of technology out there that farmers are starting to pick up on. There's the micro-lysimeter that helps farmers be able to see water stress and water use in real time. And then obviously precision agriculture with drones and being able to monitor really large fields. So yeah, some really advanced technology that farmers are definitely picking up on, hopefully help them cope with climate change, but in a way that isn't gonna negatively impact the environment even more.
There are robotic apple pickers being developed. These things don't see that well. They have to have a certain type of tree. The big old tree with big limbs that are 6 feet long ain't gonna work. It's gonna have to be a tree that's very narrow, that the machine can see all the fruit. And that's what we're planting today. We're planting a system that will work. But it's going to take us, on a farm like this, it's going to take 15 years to remove all the old ones and plant the newer system of apples. Now we'll walk over here and I'll show you the newest way of us planting apples. The current version of the robots have a visual eye system that scans the tree, finds the apples, has to compute what's an apple, what's a leaf, what's a piece of wood. And then the robot would have a mechanical arm that would grab the piece of fruit, either grab it with fingers and twist it off, suck it off, or there's a real neat one that actually has a pair of cutters that would cut the stem, which is the one I want. It's a simpler system. It's easier to train people to harvest them, to prune them, to take care of them. The advantage is it can run 24 hours a day. Actually, they work better at night because they don't have the sunlight to mess up the optics. Now, we're not going to see the robot here for at least a couple of years, and then it'll strictly be experimental. They're still working on it. We have no idea what it's going to cost, if it's really going to make sense. They're telling us now if the robot went through here, it would only pick 70% of the apples. You're still going to have to go through and pick the rest of them because it didn't see it's got a little ways to go yet. If you would have asked me 7, 8 years ago if this was going to happen, I would say you're crazy because you couldn't possibly program a computer, write all the code, do every possibility for picking apples. But with artificial intelligence software today, things are different.
Farmers are just humans, and if there's been a technology that's been created that can be helpful on their farm and increase their yields and decrease their impact on the environment, of course they're going to adapt that.
It seems like farmers are the most likely people to find the solutions because we deal with it. We're on the front lines and we're facing the pressures of people on water quality and air quality, so we're highly motivated to find solutions. Mañana. The soil is a frontier. We really don't understand it nearly as much as we need to. That's part of what we need to understand a lot more of. Manure that's been digested is a perfect plant food. We're just beginning to understand it, and it has immense potential to allow us to have higher yields and little or no losses. So we need to figure out how do we just put just the right amount on just at the right time so the plant can be as tall as possible without having excess that is lost. Nutrient boom is a way to feed the plant just as it's growing. Just like a teenager, when they're growing fast, they eat about 3 times as much. Well, instead of putting a fertilizer on in the fall and the spring and losing too much, we need to feed the corn when it's growing quickly. And it's easy to say, very, very difficult to do. We're in our 4th version or 5th version of the nutrient boom, and still has a long ways to go to finish the development. I've been interacting with government agencies and big food companies trying to get them to get behind it so we could move ahead much more quickly, and so far nobody's said, all right, we'll help you. And there aren't a lot of companies that are incentivized to help farmers figure that out because it's going to maybe reduce their sales to farmers. If we can use our nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium more completely, we don't have to buy fertilizer. So who's going to fund the research? My daughter and I last week were in Washington, D.C., and I worked with the USDA and EPA. Their interest is amazing. We didn't even plan meetings, but on the way down I sent an email, and by the next day they'd assembled 10 or 12 senior staff people to hear what we've been doing. It was encouraging to see their enthusiasm, and they all said, how can we help? This is great, how can we help? But they really can't. They can't just write a check.
I'm a firm believer that it's better to be at the table than part of the menu. You need to participate in government. You need to get out there and talk to legislators. Even though you might not think you're getting through, they got to know you're there. My wife will point out how many times I've said, well, you know, maybe I shouldn't even bother this year. But it needs to be done. Somebody's got to do it. It's something you got to do to represent your industry and represent the people of your community. So you have to get involved, even though sometimes it's really frustrating, but it's a requirement.
Agriculture is super important to the economy of New York State. Maybe a lot of New Yorkers don't realize that we're the #1 producer of yogurt and cottage cheese and cabbage, #3 in grapes, apples, and in New York, we're really privileged to be able to have a lot of these farm-to-table opportunities where we don't have to buy in too much produce from outside of the state. So that's a privilege that we could start to see wane away if we don't help protect the agriculture and protect the lands and adapt to climate change.
The weather dictates everything that you do. You gotta be watching the weather. You gotta be, you know, a weather guy.
Yeah, looking at the weather, trying to look at the weather. I check the weather every day.
Or many times during the day.
Many times during the day.
We get a lot of questions from relatives, neighbors, people. How's the weather affecting you?
Oh, we're gonna get more rain.
Yeah, that's why I stopped. Just gonna go past the spillage and go on.
I have no idea what this, you know, some people ask me, what's this year going to be like? I'll tell you in November.